Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's talk. I'm Jan Dalley, the arts editor at the Financial Times, and I'm talking to you from London. So the preview for Art Basel's newest online viewing rooms on the theme of pioneers goes live on Wednesday. And I'm delighted to be joined today by three wonderful and pioneering artists, Susan Philipsz, Miao Ying, and Dayanita Singh. All their work form highlights of the viewing rooms. Each of them has a very different approach to art making, but they share an innovative spirit in work with their media and in relation to the wider art world and indeed the wider world. Before I move to the introduction, we take a look at some of their work. I should mention that you, the audience, can ask any questions you like. Put them in the box below if you're watching on artbasel.com, or if you're watching on Facebook Live in the comments. They'll come through to me and I can ask the artists the questions as we go along or possibly at the end. We have an hour, and the last 15 minutes I'll try to give over to the audience questions. So please do send them along. So to introduce today's panel, Susan Philipsz, who is showing with Tanya Bondacker Gallery. Now, Susan joins us from Berlin today, and her work as a sound artist explores the sculptural and psychological potential of sound. The music that she selects to work with is a huge range, everything from 16th century ballads and Irish folk tunes to David Bowie's Ziggy Stardust, and it almost always is site-specific and responds directly to the site in which the work is installed. And she has many major commissions, including Lowlands, which was her Turner Prize-winning work for Glasgow International in 2010. Miao Ying, who is showing with Gallery Schwarzwälder, joins us from New York. Now, she is a pioneer, a very interesting cutting-edge artist working in the use of technology such as learning, artificial intelligence, and within contemporary art, highlighting the impact of technological innovations on our daily lives. And she's staged solo exhibitions at the M Plus Museum, the New Museum in New York, and elsewhere. Dayanita Singh, who is showing with Frith Street Gallery, joins us from New Delhi. Now, Dayanita is a photographer, but that doesn't really cover the range of what she does. She uses photography to expand on the ways in which we relate to photographic images. She pushes the boundaries all the time, not just of photography, but particularly of how photography might be shown. So she's particularly interested in the book as an exhibition space, and I think she'll talk to us about that as we go along. And she has made installations which are really objects, sort of sculptural objects, which are ways of enhancing and displaying and commenting on the photography that she makes. So I'm going to start with Miao Ying. And first of all, we're going to see a minute's clip of her pilgrimage into Walden 12, the Honour of Shepherds. So we'll watch it for a moment, and then Ying, I hope you'll tell us what we're seeing and what's going on here. Oh, well, thank you. That was fantastic. So I think we've gone into an imaginary realm, and we're looking at a piece that has an incredible range of influences. I can't even begin to list them. They just come kind of pouring into your head, everything from comic books to advertising to art historical references, ancient and modern. Tell us a little bit about this work and how and what's in it and what we should be seeing.
First of all, I'm really happy to be here, and I'm thrilled to be with the other two artists who I really admire their work. So what we saw, I'm sorry, the video was a little stretched like this way, but what we saw was actually six softwares. So each screen represents of one software that's running on the computer. So the medium of the work are a series of softwares, and they're actually live simulations. So live simulation is kind of like a performance, like it's in real time. So every time you run the software, it will appear differently. And back to what we saw on the video. So each there are six of them in total. That's why it looked a little overwhelmed. But each of them are actually represent of one AI brain, and those brains are pre-trained on supercomputers for months. So I have a tech team. So what we did was my computer science team. They fed the brains data of how humans should move. The movements that we saw on the video were completely decided, predicted by the AI in life. And I want to talk a little bit about the scene. So each AI represents of a different class. There are like superhero, someone like one of them represent of superhero, and there is privileged class. There is a wisdom, like kind of kung fu master, but it's a wizard. So they are the game engine takes place in this village, which I call the Walden 12. It's a medieval village, a fantasy land. And what you saw, the numbers that are changing in real time because they're a live simulation. Those numbers are I'm trying to mimic the indulgence system that we had in medieval age, that where the church was entitled of explaining the Bible. So, and telling you if you have a sin, and then you will have to buy your sin. So what I'm creating in this fantasy medieval village is a digital indulgence, depending on those AI behavior.
This is very, very fascinating. We've got much, much more to ask you about this, which we'll come to very shortly. Very exciting work. But next, I'm going to turn to Dayanita. Dayanita, we're going to see a few stills from your work. Three different works entitled Ladder, Pillar, and Montage. And we'll just have a look at those, and then please tell us more about what we're seeing and how it works.
That's the Corbu pillar. But more importantly, I think I have been trying for almost 10 years now to find forms for photography, or a photo architecture, if you like, that would take the image off the wall and not allow the image to get fossilized behind a glass and a frame on the wall. I felt like I had to uh, bring some life and a sculptural feel to the images, which is how I engage with them. So I wanted to build structures that people would have to walk around to experience the images and sort of experience the images with their bodies and not just their heads. The first structures were the museums, and then I started to make these pillars, which are these cubes that collapse and fit on top of each other. So you can keep rearranging images inside them, and as well as where they sit. So, and the stool is there to really suggest to people that don't just look at a photograph, but try to read it and try to look at the intention of the artist in making a form for the image. And then there's the ladder, which was another way where I wanted to take the image just a little bit off the wall. And again, there are these 5 images, and you can keep changing which ones you want on top and below. And you can even put it on the side on the wall. But here, what was interesting for me was that while I was printing my images of the Jeffrey Bava's Kandalama Hotel, because I wanted to make a smaller box and call it the Bava box, I chanced upon this mid area in the offset printing, and I said stop, and I found this in between stage of the print, which to me had more the quality of the light and the spirit of Jeffrey Bava than a print with all the tonalities. So here there was the ladder, but there was also another form of printing for offset. And this is also a form that has just appeared in the last 2 or 3 years. And then there is the montage. And I think it became clear to me that if ever there was going to be an image on a print, since all the structures are made so that you must not put my images on the wall, I thought if there's something on the wall, I have to really feel like that needs to be on the wall. And then these montages sort of appeared, where I had got very interested in photographing architecture. And then I found, quite by chance, that the images were collapsing into one another seamlessly. This is not Photoshop. This is me cutting and pasting bits of one image onto another. If you like, later I can show you how these images sort of just seem to blend into each other. This is actually an image of a 10th century temple in Japan and a new building in Ahmedabad. So, 10 centuries apart, and you might want to go to this place, but this space only exists in this photograph. It doesn't exist otherwise. So the montages is a series I'm very, very excited with. But they happen very slowly and they don't always work. This one does.
Oh, it looks beautiful. Well, we'll ask you much more about all the themes you've raised. But first of all, we will hear Susan's work. This is a clip of a piece called Together For. And we'll listen for a minute, and then Susan will tell us about it.
Yes.
Susan, it's very beautiful and also visual as well as purely the sound.
That's right. Yeah, it was part of a bigger exhibition with Tanya Bonactor Gallery in Los Angeles. It was called Sleep Close and Fast. And I think the breath is, I mean, it suggested sleep. Breath is like a metaphor for life and mortality. So what I did was I recorded myself breathing through these organ pipes. And then I took the recordings and had the sound emanate from within the pipes. So the speakers are really very small speakers. So it's the sound of the pipes themselves that you hear. So I think it evokes sleep. And yeah, I mean, I'd worked with organ pipes before, quite a long time ago. When I first started out as an artist, I made a work for a space in Glasgow at Pearce Institute. And they had this incredible church hall with this disused church organ. And I thought it would be interesting if I could breathe life back into the church organ. So I made this installation that used the entire space. It was a multi-channel installation. It was back in 1997, I think. So yeah, it was a long time ago. So at that point, I was really excited about working with exploring space with sound. I mean, that for me was really exciting, and for me it was limitless what you could do there. And you know, I could just see that every space had potential to work with. You know, and so right from the beginning, I was interested in the spatial properties of sound and how it can define architecture. And you know, and you know, I could really work with scale and ways that you know, I didn't need to change the space, you know, physically, materially. But I could change the way people perceive the space, you know, or how they would experience it in a new way with having the sound define the architecture. So for me, that was really exciting, and I've continued to work with all types of different spaces and with scale, you know. So I would have like one sound calling to another from across a very wide distance. And yeah, so but when I first started working with the organ pipes, it was funny. I brought one back with me to Belfast, and I'd been living in Belfast. I got stopped at customs, and the customs officers. I mean, it does look like a bit like I don't know, a missile or something. And they both discussed it with each other, and they looked at each other and said, "It's art." If they'd asked me, I wouldn't have said it's art, but it's funny now that now it is art, and I am exhibiting it as art.
So you got through customs like that. Well, that's a very good story to tell about the customs officers. Not very many places would have understood that. Well, thank you. That's absolutely lovely. So, as we've seen, these are three artists, all of whom have broken new ground in their fields and continue to break new ground. So, it is very much on our theme of pioneering and pioneers. But I wanted to ask each of them whether or not really it matters to them to be pioneers. Do they think of themselves as being pioneers? Could I come to Ying first? Ying, is the idea of being a pioneer, is that an actual driving force for you? Is it important? Does it remain important? Or is it just something that happens?
Sorry, I was muted. I was saying that
Yes.
because a lot of the motivations for my work comes from technology, and it's ever changing. And I'm particularly because I'm from China and the technology develops really fast, rapidly, and that kind of pushed me forward. So I think I don't think of it particularly. I just wanted to, I think it's really fascinating how it changes people's life. So, mhm.
So it's more about a response to the technology that is being and each new technological advance is a separate inspiration for you, perhaps.
Yeah, because it's constantly changing people's perception of the world, and I think that's fascinating.
Yes. Well, we've already had one question from an audience member who wants to know to what extent you're influenced or inspired by video games, and whether that's a technology that's important to you. Is that something that is inspirational, or do you feel that you're way out ahead of them anyway?
Um, so the work is on the game engine, and as a metaphor, I don't see it a direct reference to video game, but a great metaphor of a simulation. Because part of the reason the project is called Walden 12 is from Walden 2, and Walden 2 is the novel written by Skinner, who's famous for he's the behavior psychologist, and he's famous for the Skinner's box, which is a conditional box, where he put animals in there, and there are keys or bars that the animal can touch, and then there's different consequence. There's punishment and there's reward on their behavior. So I thought it's really interesting to have it as a life simulation. I think the whole game engine to me is like this Skinner's box, but it's like it's on game engine. So we're watching all those AIs, like they're trying to behave themselves so they can get higher score. So they're kind of like the animals in the Skinner's box.
But at the same time, the narrative has very kind of old-fashioned moral values, doesn't it? It's about the shepherds are safeguarding the land, aren't they? And there's an honor system, and these are very traditional moral ground rules, as it were, for your futuristic fantasy land.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by medieval art because there's a kind of, the history, and also I live really close to the Cloister Museum. It's part of the Met, and they have this wonderful medieval art collection. And I like the stiffness of of medieval art, because it's kind of like when people haven't really figured out, the proper way of science behind, all those technology, even in painting. I think it's a good parallel, and to look at, from the aesthetic and also the culture of it. Because I'm trying to, I guess this simulation is trying to imagine a plausible future, that because now people talking about filter bubbles and all those big big tech tycoons have all of our information, people trying to against Facebook and Amazon, all that. So this is um, a kind of a future that, what if all your online behavior were collected by a system, and then you have to behave yourself because everything is recorded.
Well, it's fascinating. Yes, old meets new. Dayanita, I'll come to you next. Photography is, in a sense, it's a new medium compared to oil paint or something like that, but it's already a classic and well established form. And you have decided to push its edges in all sorts of fascinating ways. But does the idea of actually breaking boundaries, is that part of the way you see yourself as an artist? Is it actually part of the way that you feel your artistic project goes, or is it simply that something you want to do?
No, I don't see myself as breaking boundaries, but when I see the resistance, I realize I'm pushing something. And so I don't think of myself as pioneers, but I do feel that photography has got sort of stuck to the wall and a little fossilized there, and I cannot bear it anymore. And I looked for references in Europe, in London, in New York, in all the photo places, thinking somebody would have thought of this, some curator, some photographers, and I didn't find anything. So I just started to make my own forms, and I showed them at the Hayward in 2013, and everybody was quite surprised. And it's like, you take such good photographs, you don't need to do this. And I said, it's precisely because I take fairly okay pictures that I can do this. I can try and push photography in other directions. And I'm just one person. But if everybody were to get out of that box of photography, we would have so many forms, because photography allows for that. And I think it's the market or the institutions that get in the way of it. And photographers, most of all, themselves. So, I stand on my own and do what I feel I have to do. I just have to. I have to build that pillar, and I have to build that ladder, and I have to make the montage. And if nobody likes it, wants it, there's not very much I can do about it, because I have to do it.
Well, that's the very best reason for making anything, isn't it? And the forms you create are also they're also quite traditional. They're beautifully made in wood, often in wood. The ones I've seen of yours are all wooden, specially created and lovingly crafted. And so these are very unusual and new sculptural objects, but they're also made in wonderful methods. And I think we can see a beautiful case behind you that is a case in point. What's behind you? What are we looking at that's behind you there in your room?
That's actually new work. That's the painted over photographs. But it's one of those museums that, and then I can sort of open and close it and create different architectures within a space. But the structures have been built with the same idea as the photographs. The photographs have to be strong in themselves to stand all these different iterations. But the structures too have to be incredibly well detailed and well made, because it would be too easy for people to just say, oh, they're so tacky, or they're kitsch, or they're not well made, or they're not, because people don't like change so much, no? Especially in photography. People want to keep the status quo. So I thought, I'll give you pretty good photographs, and I'll give you structures to match, but they'll be made exquisitely.
Oh, they are exquisite. And I've never forgotten the time we met each other at the Delhi Art Fair, when you had a trolley that was one of your very first things, wasn't it? And you remember you saying, I just had this trolley that I was pushing my books around on, and then somebody said, "Can I buy your trolley?" And I thought of it as being an artwork. So that must have been a very
the booth as an artwork, but nobody bought it, and I'm really glad they didn't buy it, because I think of it as perhaps that artwork really started the museums that led to the pillar, that led to the ladder. So I'm really glad you saw the book cart.
I loved your book cart. It was absolutely beautiful. Well, we'll come back in a minute to the way in which you think about books, and how the book in itself is an exhibition space, which is another fascinating idea. But before that, I want to turn to Susan. Now, Susan, you've always been a pioneer, because sound art in itself is, even though you've been making it for for a long, long time, it's still considered a radical form. Do you get tired of people talking about you as a kind of, as radical? You probably think it's not radical; it's just what I do. About whether you feel like a pioneer or not.
No, I wouldn't say I feel like a pioneer. I mean, I don't think you think of yourself as a pioneer until maybe retrospectively you might look back and think, okay, that was something new, but at the time you're not really thinking, I'm going to do something nobody else is doing. But I think I'm known for working with my voice, especially at the beginning, and I was interested in the motive and the psychological effects of sound and voice. But I remember at one point I decided to do this intervention in the supermarket, and where I was singing these melancholy pop songs through the PA system, and they were all songs sung in the first person, and I wanted to create a sense of solitude, like someone just singing to themselves as opposed to an audience, and but I was extremely nervous about that and how it would be received. Would people understand what I was trying to do? And so I suppose that, when I think back, was one of the most nerve-wracking things. That will people get it? Will they understand? So you hear this disembodied voice. Instead of the normal announcements that you would hear in the supermarket, then you hear this unaccompanied voice singing these familiar songs, but made unfamiliar because they are unaccompanied. And so I continued with that, and it was well received, and I continued with that, and I worked with recorded version, where I've shown it now. It was recently shown in the Castello di Rivoli atrium space, and also in the Byler Foundation. So I'm not nervous about it anymore. But I remember at that time I was extremely unsure about what people would think.
Well, when we were
Yeah.
chatting earlier on, you talked about some of your early influences and how this had really began, what your early inspirations had been and how this had begun for you. Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, but when I was a student, I was really, I read about Max Neuhaus in the Parquet magazine, and that he'd done this installation in a stairwell. And I didn't know, and it was with sound, but I didn't know what the sound was, but just the idea that he would occupy this transitory space, that I found that very inspiring. And that was at the same time as I was reading Gaston Bachelard's Poetics of Space, and in particular the intimate immensity chapter, and I wanted to work with space, I wanted to define space with sound, and I started off with my voice. I was, I would often sung in different choirs and things. So I was very aware of. I became very aware of my inner body space when I sang, and what happens then when you project my voice out into the room. I mean, it was a sculptural experience. I was aware of my inner body space, but then when you project the voice out, then I became aware that it could define the architecture. So, I mean, that's when I really started to introduce my sound into my installations, and thinking about how I could work with these big spaces. I wasn't daunted by working with big space, like a lot of space, and that was the wonderful thing about working with sound. You could really utilize these huge spaces, and I've continued from the beginning till now working in that way. Although more recently it's been objects. I'm interested in the acoustics of space, but now I've become interested in the acoustics of objects, like the organ pipes that you in together.
Well, there's so much to go on talking to you about there. I wanted to move on though to the sort of realities of the past year, which I think have interested everybody. In a sense, we've all become pioneers. Everything has changed, and we've all got to grapple with a new reality. For artists, it's the fact that people, on the whole, can't see their work or hear their work or experience their work in real life and in real time, and it all has to be virtual. But for you, Ying, your work is in that realm anyway, so presumably the realities of the past year haven't been a problem for you. In fact, possibly even, it's brought your work to the fore. How have you felt about it? How's it been for you, this very tough year, I know, but some people have found it creative and interesting. And possibly for your work, it's not so different. Tell us how it's felt, how it's been.
As first of all, I think it has been a really productive year for me, and I think for artists, like, because you have to travel a lot. I don't know if the other artists feel the same way, but to me, like, because I couldn't go anywhere, couldn't go set up any exhibitions, so my time is like before, like, because you have to travel, so it's more fragmented, your time, I feel like I have more time to work, and so we've been working on this piece, and we just, me and my computer science team would meet up on Zoom every day, 9 to 5. And like for them, we were meeting in New York City before physically, and it's like commute time and all that, and I think we all felt it's more efficient for us. As Speaking of my work, yeah, my project's website is a core conceptual spirit kind of for my each project, including this one also has a website. But the physical space is also important. It's more like experience, lifestyle kind of, how when you go to, like, to me, it's more like an Apple store that, because all my work are kind of available online. But when you go to the physical exhibitions, then you get the feeling of those ideology, conceptual websites. Like it's what is like you kind of like experience it in a different dimension. So that's a shame that all the exhibitions are postponed. But yeah, the workflow has been great.
Oh, some good, some bad. Yes. Dayanita, it must be very rough when people can't see your beautiful work for real, and because I know it well, and I know that it's work that you really want to see, and particularly your objects and their beautiful making and everything. But how have you been over the past year? Has it been creative, or has it been? I mean, it's bound to be different and difficult. And have you found that people respond to the work differently when they see it online only?
Well, I've been very lucky that I have, I'm super privileged to be able to live in this bubble. And I've just spent the year going through 40 years of my archive. So I found so much material that I have to now stop photographing because I have so much. I've excavated so many underground tunnels that I have to make so many works and so many books. I didn't feel as bad as I may have otherwise about people not being able to experience my work, because in the past years I've been making these book objects and suitcase museum and found ways for the book to become the exhibition. And many friends have told me that they've had openings for this museum Bhavan box in their homes because they couldn't have an exhibition. And so they've, taken one of the books and put it like the printing press museum and put it on their mantelpiece and had an opening for this exhibition with some wine and a little conversation and photos for me. And I got very excited because earlier when, I was making all these suitcase museum and bookcase and bookcase exhibition, people were sort of rolling their eyes and saying, okay, now, well, so what? And I think actually, yes, there is a lot to that because in times to come, I have this big retrospective in Berlin next year, but who knows what the world will be like next year. And so I'm already thinking that while I'm making all this work and all these incredible structures, but if for some reason I can't do the shipping, I have to keep a parallel story going with the books. And in the worst case scenario, I just send the PDFs to Steidl and he prints them all for me. And we put the book on the wall and make a book exhibition out of my retrospective. The curator doesn't know I'm thinking like this. But I think all artists will have to start thinking about the book form of their work because it's such a simple idea, no? If Susan's work wouldn't work. No, not all artists, but there are artists who could just send their files to Delhi and I could print them and show them and I could have their exhibition without them or their work having traveled. And I'm sure with Susan and Ying too, one could find ways, we're artists. So it's part of our work to find different ways to disseminate the work. And maybe COVID is going to be a time that's going to push a lot of us to think out of the box, out of the institutional framework for sharing our work.
Well, and that, of course, accords, even if it's enforced by COVID, it's actually accords with another big concern that we all have, which is in the environmental impact of this amazing art world that we all live in, but the footprint of the traveling, the fairs, the everything else has become a little bit out of hand. I think everybody agreed that long before the pandemic struck. But I love the idea of your portable artwork. In fact, it rather chimes with something Ying was saying about medieval work. The way that in medieval times they had those beautiful little triptychs and things which you carried with you, didn't you? They were traveling, usually devotional things for prayer. So it shows that in some ways there's nothing new. It's all been invented before. It sounds wonderful, though, and that was beautiful. Thank you so much for showing us that work. What was the name of that work you showed us? The expanding work. That's one of your libraries. Museum.
Yeah, that's Bhavan box. When all the museums went into other museums' collections, I made a miniature version with Steidl.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, Susan, pick up from that. How's it been to have to disseminate your work in a different way and have to, realize that people were experiencing it differently and couldn't be in the spaces, particularly the site-specific spaces that you often work in? Has it been hard?
Not as hard as you would have. I mean, I did a work in the Kunstwerker that opened in January, and people could go and see it because it was in the courtyard. So that was, I think with sound and public space, it's actually not bad medium to be working in during lockdown, So, or partial lockdowns. So yeah, so people have been, and it's been getting a lot of good press. So I'm very happy with that work. I've also was in a book by Tom Strummer, Build It in the Pandemic. And he's a curator from the Kunsthaus Bregenz, and he put together this amazing book. And I'm in that too. And he's, because one of the exhibitions that should have opened last year was in Philadelphia with Philadelphia Contemporary. And it was in this old mansion in the middle of a cemetery. And it had been inspired by Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart in particular. Poe was from Philadelphia and he wrote many of his wonderful stories there. But sadly, we couldn't open the show. But I came up with an idea to do a work online which was related to the show. And so I encourage people to, they could download the sound files onto their smartphones. And as I said before, I'm interested in exploring the acoustics of objects. And so the experience of the work would be you would hear it emanating from under the floorboards or behind the wall or up inside the chimney breast of this incredible mansion in the middle of a cemetery. So so for this work, people could download the sound, which was the sound of muffled drums. And they could then explore objects in their own home and place the phone in a pot, a pan, a basin, anything that, and it was quite incredible how this very small sound can resonate and amplify the sound, you know. So that's in this book too. So that he put just images and the description of there it is, of the work, me exploring vases and different things in this very kitchen. And I made a video and people could listen to it online as well. But I have been very productive working on 4 shows that are all opening in April. So fingers crossed.
Okay, wow. And
Yeah.
I think you said three of them are in Germany. Or tell
Yeah.
us where they all are.
One's in Bonn, one's in Berlin, another one is out in the countryside in this sculpture park, Schloss Schwanta, it's called, and the other one is in the state Tretikov in Moscow. And
In
so they're all
Moscow.
pretty much in the same week, yeah. So I've been in
Yeah.
a tunnel, so it's nice to be out of the tunnel for a bit, talking to you, yeah.
Well, it's lovely to talk to you. This is fascinating because actually what you're all describing is how you have all found ways to bring your art to us without needing the usual settings, without needing the usual galleries. Certainly, sadly, we haven't been able to have the usual art fairs. We've got the lovely OVRs instead. But it's as if, in one bound, you've all found ways in which we can experience your art without having to be in the conventional spaces. So it'll be really fascinating to see what happens next and whether we ever go back to quite what we were doing before. Now I've got loads of questions for you, so excuse me a minute while I look for these questions. All right, let's start here. Ying, I have one for you. The question is, this is from one of our audience. In your previous works, there's been an element of humor. Is it still the case in this new video work? Is humor important to you? Is it, you're already laughing. I like that. Yeah.
Yes, it is. I think the sense of humor, from like internet memes, and especially I think for Chinese citizens, people are really creative, and I love the sense of humor. So in this work, all those AI, the six AIs, they're built as heartthrobs. I built them as like this kind of trying to be very musculated, attractive. Um, Male figures, because they represent, this it's kind of a Stockholm syndrome, that I have with a centralized power. So I hope that's the sense of humor there, that people would think it's kind of, like heartthrobs, but kind of, greasy and not so attractive. Yeah.
Oh, good. So there are lots of jokes built in, and probably for aficionados of your previous work and for other video works and video games, there are lots of references and jokes built in that not all of us might get, but I imagine it's an ongoing conversation. Is that right?
Yes.
Good. Sorry about the glasses. So, Susan, why did you start using sounds defining architecture? Are you coming from the musical angle or the the visual angle? Does the sound allow you to visually see differently? So there are several questions there. I think you've already answered the thing about the musical angle because you talked about singing and your voice. But that's quite interesting. That question: does the sound allow you to visually see differently?
I think that's what happens.
That
It
makes sense.
defines the space and you see the space in a new way. It might be a place that you pass through all the time, but then when the sound activates the space, the architecture, you see it in a new way, Like, I think Yeah, and was there another aspect to that question? Was there another?
Well, it was basically when did you start using sounds defining architecture? But I think you answered that too. Actually, I think you did answer that.
Yeah.
And yes, coming from the musical angle or the visual angle, and whether the sound allows you to see differently, which I think is
Yeah.
very interesting, isn't it? Because it's a kind of synesthesia, if that's how you pronounce it. I've actually never known how to pronounce that word. Could be wrong. The sense of our different senses and perceptions coming in together.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how their senses are heightened when they experience the sound. I often hear from people when they like to describe to me the exact moment when they encountered the work. You know, if it's especially in public space, you know, or because I think people's senses are heightened. They're either waiting in anticipation, or they don't expect it, so they happen upon it unexpectedly, and then you become very aware of your surroundings. And so I think that's really interesting. And often people would describe the weather. This often comes up, what the weather was like. And I think, why is that? Why do they always want to tell me about the weather? And I think it's because their senses are heightened, and they're just, like I say, this element of surprise or their anticipation. So yeah, it's very, very interesting. And people bring their own stories to the work as well, you know, their own local histories, and they assume that I know these, I've made these connections to things that and I no, I did not know that. That's really interesting. So people have their own interpretations as well, which I love.
Well, that's certainly, it certainly bears out the idea that sound, vision, and absolutely everything else that goes on around it all feeds richly into the work. And oh, by the way, audience, thank you very much. Great questions. So there's so many here, I can't take them all. But there's a question here about memory. A memory seems to play a part in all the artist's work, which it does. Also thinking about Susan's work in Vienna for the Heldenplatz. But particularly, Dayanita, I think your work plays very, very strongly on elements of memory. It's as if you evoke memories that we didn't actually have, but we sort of we know their memory. I mean, there's a sense of memorializing.
Fantastic.
But
That's such
when you
that I create memories for you that you didn't know you had. Well, I
your
think
work that's
that's
like empty office blocks and things like that, or old, just all the files of some ancient abandoned office or something like that, and you think, well, I've never been into that building, but it's almost as if I remember going there.
yeah,
And I think
that's
that's what Susan was saying about her work, that as if Susan's work is giving us a memory that we didn't actually have, but now we do. So tell us about the role of memory for you.
I think every photograph is memory because that moment has already passed. So it's working with this huge archive of memory, and then out of that, trying to create something that's in the memory but in the well. So if one can find a connection between the two and hope that there can be a future out of it and it's not just all the memory. And that's where the structures come in. So the image might be more about the memory, but then when I'm able to make a montage, for example, what memory do I create for you in this montage? That's an image and another image, right? But then a piece of this image comes onto this image and it becomes a very beautiful space. But it's not a space that you can go to, but you still will have a memory of it. So I don't know if I can articulate this clearly, but it's the memory part of photography that I hope to create another kind of memory with these structures, whether it's the montage or it's the offset printing or it's the pillars, to create a different memory out of that memory. And therefore, I call this new memory as the future memory. It's something like that. It's not enough. That memory part is not enough for me. That's a given. And I want to do more with it. But I remember when I was in Lisbon at Susan's project at a vineyard, and she's so right, because I was suddenly noticing the trees in a way that I hadn't before. And then it was so moving that I was on the phone to my mother, Susan, and asking her to sing me lullabies, because the project had to do with lullabies. I still get so moved thinking about it. And, so I have my own memory of Susan's project. It doesn't matter what the name was, what her intention was, what she hoped to do, but I carry in my heart forever, walking through where they keep all the wine. It's an experience I'll never forget. And it really doesn't matter what Susan had intended. It's become a part of me now. So I've created my own memory and landscape out of Susan's work.
Well, that's wonderful, isn't it? And in a sense, what you're describing is a fantasy world, which is exactly what Ying makes. So very quickly, Ying, because we've just literally got 2 minutes left, I'm so sorry to say. It's gone by so fast. Tell us just very quickly, even in your very futuristic world, is memory something that you think about, or something that plays a strong part?
I was thinking about that. It's funny because how all those AI brains were trained for months, and when those AI got put into the game engine, it's kind of like they have to, although they're not human, but they had to memorize the training, right, in order to make a prediction of what is the correct behavior to have a higher score. So yeah, I don't know if echoes the memory part, but it feels like it's a parallel kind of like, from the machine, or like even, from the cookies that we're using on our website, like they remembers who we are. So that's a different kind of dimension of memories.
You're training your AIs to have a memory, aren't you? You're imparting that humanity into them, which is absolutely essential, because yes, otherwise they wouldn't have the intelligence bit of the artificial intelligence. Well, it's a really fascinating and rich vein. So thank you to I don't have the name of our audience member who started us on the theme of memory, but I'm glad they did. I'm so sorry we are out of time, which is a huge shame, because I would love to go on talking to my wonderful panel. Thank you to you, and thank you to everyone for joining us today, and particularly to those of you who submitted comments and questions, really good ones, thanks. And to my wonderful panel, Susan, Ying and Dayanita, all of whose work can be explored in depth when OVR Pioneers opens later this week. And you can find that on the artbasel.com website. And I look forward to seeing you all again for our next conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Jan.
The AI memory has it all now.